The next lessons we'll study are about absolute value. This is Unit 4. And absolute value is probably familiar to you. It's a number or an expression inside these straight brackets. Absolute value is defined as a distance from 0, like here, and this distance is inside the bracket. So here I can be 3 away from 0 in a positive direction, or I can be 3 away from 0 in a negative direction. But since absolute value only recognizes the distance, either one of these is equivalent. So we'll define this as distance from 0 without direction. And with direction, what I mean is positive or negative. Because this is defined as being without a sign, then it has to be a positive number when you evaluate and pull out of a absolute value. So note to self, absolute value of anything, whatever's in here, scribble, has to be equal to positive number, or absolute value of scribble has to be equal to 0. It just can't be negative. If it's negative, that doesn't make sense with how we're defining it. I have an example here to work out, and I'll talk you through the steps. Solving these problems is not real complicated. One thing that I think is a good idea is to make these really bold, or else like especially tall maybe, so that the brackets stand out from the numbers. Part of the reason for that is we want to isolate this expression. That's step 1. Isolate the absolute value. So that's everything that's included inside these straight brackets. If you want to, if this helps you focus or know where to look, you could highlight this and pretend it's frozen in a block of ice, and it has to stay just exactly like this until it's isolated. So I would look for expression, equal sign, number. To isolate this, I need to move this 1. So I'll have absolute value negative 8x plus 1. And see how this can get confusing here. You can make a fancy one like that if you need to. So this absolute value expression will be equal to 17. And we need to check this once it's isolated. And make sure that absolute value of whatever's in here is not equal to a negative number. It can be a positive number, it can be 0. So when I check this, it's positive 17. That is fine. So proceed with solving. You can't take anything out of absolute value brackets. You can't distribute in. You can't divide out or like subtract this 1 or anything like that. It stays just like that until it's isolated. And then to finish solving, you have to take these brackets off. drop the brackets. Now is when we acknowledge that there's two ways to get a solution that's a distance of 17 from 0. It could be that you have a positive way to do that and also a negative solution. I'm just going to put equals number. So when you take the brackets off, you split this into two problems. The possibility that it was positive to begin with and the possibility that it was negative to begin with. So take the brackets off and replace with parentheses. It'll still be equal to 17. This one will be positive, this one will be negative. Put the signs outside the parentheses. And then you have a little baby problem to solve. Solve for x. If I have a positive 1 out here and I distribute in, I don't change anything. I can just take these parentheses off. To solve for x, I subtract 1, which gives me negative 8x equals 16. I divide by negative 8. And I have x is equal to negative 2. The x value can be equal to a negative number. That's fine. I just don't want the absolute value expression to be equal to a negative number. I need to also find the solution to the situation when this is negative to begin with. So I can either distribute the sign, which seems to be pretty popular around here, so I'll do it that way. Your other option is to multiply or divide the entire equation by negative 1 and use that method to incorporate the negative. But like I said, I'll distribute this and it changes the signs on the left side of the equation, and then I solve. 8x will be equal to 18, so I divide by 8 and x should be equal to either 18 over 8, or I can reduce that to 9 over 4, or you can write this as a decimal. It would be 2.25. Okay, so here are my two solutions. Generally, you have two solutions, so just look for that. If you have no solution, that happens when you break your rule. After your equation, your expression is isolated, so this, again, is the part that I'm trying to isolate. Here. This is negative 2 times absolute value expression. It's basically like writing negative 2 absolute value expression equals 20, because you can't multiply into here. You can't change this. It has to stay exactly like that. So I would have to divide this by negative 2. And I would get absolute value expression equals negative 10. When I write my expression back in here, I'm saying that the absolute value of negative 8x minus 4 needs to be equal to negative 10, and this is a deal breaker. My rule was that my isolated expression, whatever that may be, cannot be equal to any negative number. So there's no solution. You can solve this and get values for x. The problem with them is that if you substitute back into the original equation where the x is, your equation will not be true for the solutions that you find. So if you come across one of these and it's isolated and equal to negative number, then you can stop and put no solution. Sometimes you have only one solution, and that happens when your isolated expression is equal to 0. So whatever's in here equals 0. I'll have one solution. The reason is when you split this into positive and negative, you're ultimately trying to find a positive and a negative way to get to 0, and there's only one 0, so there will only be one solution. So here I've got absolute value of something equals a positive number. I get two solutions. I have absolute value of something. I made those awfully close together. Equals 0. No. Goodness, I got tired all of a sudden. Equals negative number, and that's no solution. And then absolute value of something equals 0, that's one solution. So go on your merry way isolating, just like we've been doing. In this case, I need to move this 2 and the 3. So I'll move the 2 first. 3 absolute value expression equals 0. Divide by 3. Absolute value expression, which is equal to absolute value of negative 3x minus 1, equals 0. So I continue through. I just to verify that this is not a negative number. It's 0, so that's fine. That's acceptable. This is isolated. Make sure that you actually write this down, isolated like this, instead of skipping ahead and simplifying and then immediately breaking apart. Stop and check and make sure it's something you can solve. So this, I'll change the brackets for parentheses, and then my problems to solve are positive negative 3x minus 1 equals 0 and negative 3x minus 1 equals 0. If I multiply this whole equation or divide by negative 1 to deal with this negative out here instead of distributing, then what I get is negative 3x minus 1 equals 0. These are the same. That's why you only have one solution. So continue and solve your equation. If 3x equals 1, divide by negative 3, and you find that x is equal to negative 1/3. You have 6 practice problems like these. Go ahead and work on those.